Welcome to Everfree Radio. My name is Brush and Bones for a special edition of our Fanfic Review Corner here today. With me as co-host is Andrew Joshua Talon.
Yo.
And today our special guest interviewer, author of famous story On a Cross and Arrow, is Connor Cogwork.
Hello.
Andrew, you want to start us off?
Certainly. Connor Cogwork is here today because his fanfic deals with a common trope in pony fanfiction, that is the flipped gender universe.
Yep, the flipped gender universe where basically the main cast as we know them, females, wind up in an alternate universe reality where all characters who were female are male and vice versa. So, Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get involved in the pony fandom?
And who is your favorite pony?
Well, it was last year, April or so. A friend was into ponies at the time, and they were introducing me to odd things or showing me Pony Boru topic things and Pony-chan threads. And there was one Chan thread that I came onto that they linked me, and I thought it was funny at the time. I decided to just go ahead and read through it. And eventually, as I was reading through it, I came across a picture of this one sea green unicorn who looked all teary-eyed and sad. And I went, "Aw, who's that pony?" And that kind of hooked me right there.
Was the sea green pony you're talking about Lyra?
It turned out, yes, it was indeed.
I still don't get that meme. I'm not against it, I just don't get the meme.
You don't get the name being Lyra?
Why her, of all ponies, to be a sea pony? I don't get it.
Oh, the whole sea pony meme or whatever. I'm not entirely sure. I think it deals with the whole fact that, like, there's this big thing in fandom about her wanting to be something other than, like, a pony, usually a human. Like, she wants hands. And so, like, I guess that might have been where it came from.
I actually know who drew the first sea pony picture.
Really?
That was John Hoseko.
Oh, I should have guessed it was John Hoseko.
You can blame him for essentially starting and perpetuating the sea pony Lyra meme.
Alrighty, well, okay, well, so is Lyra your favorite pony then?
She is one of many favorites by now, but yeah.
He's copping out.
Okay, let's go ahead and cut this down. Of the main 6, who would you say your favorite of them was?
Applejack.
Huh.
Applejack, huh? Wow, that's not very common.
I like that choice. Then again, I like all the ponies, of course.
A friend recently told me they've been charting the progress of bronies by asking him who their favorite pony is. Usually, starting bronies say Rainbow Dash or Applejack is their favorite, and ponies who have been in the fandom for a very, very long time say that their favorite pony is actually Rarity.
I've noticed that Rarity and Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy are usually the ones who are the most popular, despite all of the Twilight is best pony meme stuff going on. Headed by voice actress Tara Strong.
Well, of course, she wouldn't have any possible motivation for making Twilight the most popular.
Oh, of course not.
Well, all right, well, getting on to the actual fanfic, then, what made you decide to write On a Cross and Arrow? What was your inspiration for the story? Where did it come from?
Okay, well, first off, after being in the fandom for a while, I ran into an artist on DeviantArt who'd been doing essentially flash pictures of the main 6, and he had created the original male main 6 characters. And at that point in time, the storyline that he was going with was that Twilight had goofed the spell and had turned them all into cults. And personally, I thought, I don't really like that particular kind of story. It just sounded really odd to me. So, I'm going through Pony Boru, and I managed to run into another one of those gender flip pony pictures, except this one had both Rainbow Dash and the male Rainbow Dash, Rainbow Blitz, standing side by side, and as well as Fluttershy and the male Fluttershy, Butterscotch, a little bit lower on the cloud. you might know the picture that I'm speaking of, because
It's
this
used
picture,
for the title picture on Equestria Daily, isn't it?
it is. That is, and the reason for that is when I saw that picture, I essentially sat there for half an hour thinking, now that might work. So I stood there and stared at the picture for like 30 minutes and playing out the scenario in my head. And then a little bit after that, I wrote the scene with Rarity in the lamppost.
Oh.
That was the first scene in the story that I wrote.
Okay, well, very interesting, very interesting. So that actually brings up a good question, what you said there. You got the inspiration from a picture and from someone else's original idea with Twilight goofing up the spell and turning them into cults. Does that mean you got the alternate names of their male counterparts from that same source?
For the most part, yes. That I would like to credit, because everybody thinks that I came up with the names, and that's not true. I need to credit Trotsworth on DeviantArt for creating the names of Duskshine, Applejack, this name was the same, Elusive, who's the male Rarity, Rainbow Blitz, Butterscotch. I already said Duskshine, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
And Berry Bubble?
Berry Bubble. Now, that's the only real change that I made was Trotsworth, originally his name was Bubble Berry. I switched it around to Berry Bubble. That was the only change I'd made.
Barriswainer Da Vinci Bubble.
Yeah, that's what I used.
All right. Let's put it this way. What is your story about? What is the theme of the story?
Well, the theme of the story essentially is coming to terms with sides of yourself that you were not expecting. It's a little difficult to say for certain because I didn't really have a absolute solid theme in my head, but that's essentially what the story has come to mean, and essentially how you conduct yourself in a strange yet familiar setting, and expecting things of yourself, and sometimes you may not act like how you think you would.
To be honest, I feel that is the best motivation and the best thing to do for stories such as these, because, you know, oftentimes it's just, what would happen if this happened? What would happen if we switched them with ponies from another universe? Blah, blah, blah. And that's as far as the story goes. Just the concept, you know, it's a kind of high concept. But your focus was more on character as we read through it. I felt that your primary focus was on character interaction and differences between the characters, exploring the world through their eyes.
Yes.
I kind of got the feeling that your description is pretty apt, although it really was like, I was kind of one of those readers that took it a lot more at face value. Like, it wasn't so much presenting you with a particular like theme or moral, and more was just like, this is a fun little instance of time where they're going to meet alternate universe counterparts and shenanigans.
Well, that was kind of the focus, yeah.
And I did appreciate how you handled the relationships. What was your motivation and how you handled the relationships between the main six and their distaff counterparts?
Well, mainly I was going off their own personalities and essentially flipping them in a mirror. Because you think about it, doesn't it make sense that Rarity would more or less be falling all over herself as a male?
Oh, it makes perfect sense to me.
Same here.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, Andrew, that's spear counterpart. It's distaff when it's a female counterpart to a male.
Oh, my bad. I can't keep up with all these. All these new tropes, all you youngsters running around with this, you know who and
crazy
what
computer
they're...
stuff.
I know, and your YouTube and your iPod and your nuclear weapons, and get off my lawn.
So, while it was obvious that certain characters like Elusive and Rarity were probably just a foregone conclusion, how did you come up with the whole like thing with the relationships between like some of the other characters, like the really awkward sort of rivalry-esque yet also like respect and appreciation between like Rainbow Dash and Rainbow Blitz, and then the like awkward confusion between Dusk and Twilight? For those of you who are listening, if you haven't read the story, there will be spoilers, so...
Just read it. It's easier.
Just go read it.
And it's a good story.
I'm glad you guys think so. Well, let's see. It became clear to me right from the start that the more stronger-willed and most definitely competitive characters would instantly see a threat and seeing their other selves. It just seemed to me it would be natural for Rainbow Dash and Rainbow Blitz to go on the defensive when they saw essentially themselves, and yet at the same time a separate pony. Applejack, they are very heavily family based, and you know, of course, that the scene out in the marketplace, had the part where Applejack, the female Applejack, I'm going to call her JJ at the moment. Cousin JJ.
I was just about to suggest just that.
Yeah.
Cousin JJ was essentially going under a guise and having essentially to go against her element and more or less lie. And the male AJ kind of picked up on that. So there was something of a showdown there. And then later on, going off the fact that they're more or less related, and they're heavily family based. They feel connections really heavily. So I decided to go with that particular instance. They're both family types, and they could feel that they were at least of blood. So the connection between them more or less deepened at that. And they decided from then to go with the we're blood related, and that's good enough. If that makes any sense at all.
It does.
No, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. So, with all that in mind, because you did all this various different things when it came to the dice staff and spear counterparts meeting each other, when you had them meet, not all of them fell head over heels in love with their alternate self. Not all of them thought of each other as family. Not all of them thought of each other as just a really awesome, crazy, like-minded friend. What made you decide to mix things up and not just have all of them have that kind of mutual attraction to their mirror self?
Probably the first reason is that he's not a bad author, so...
Well, aside from the obvious reason that would kind of be the easy, poorly thought out method to go with. I mean, was there any particular reason why you chose certain people over others?
Well, I didn't really consciously decide anything. It's kind of hard for me to answer because I didn't really think about this consciously, because...
It just sort of came out?
Yeah,
I like it when I write like that. When you know the characters well enough to let them kind of direct the story flow is a very good thing to develop in a writer.
Exactly.
Because it actually helps you write. It helps with about half your problem, the characterization. The other half is the plot. And the plot, well, we could get into that because we've been gushing over the characterization so much, or we could continue with the characterization. What do you guys think?
When you know the characters and you're able to write it out and it just kind of flows, I mean, if it just flows out there and it shows you're not really working against the grain, I think that's the most natural way to write. It is the most correct way to write because, you know, if it comes naturally, it's easier for your mind to accept.
Yeah.
But, that actually leads me into another thing that doesn't have to do with the relationships between the main six and their counterparts, but rather some of the personality quirks you gave the characters that may not necessarily be considered canon, particularly, and this is going to have to be brought up, so this is going to probably result in our interview being a little bit more than PG rated, but that's also kind of necessary because the story is a bit more than PG rated on account of the fact that there's a bit more adult themes in this story than typical for a children's show. But I gotta say it, Rainbow Dash and Blitz being bi-curious. What drove you to write them that way?
Trying to steer the middle road, more or less.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
At the time I was writing it, there was a lot of discussion going on about orientations of the certain characters. When I was writing, there was how many topics? Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. Either way, I decided I wanted to put something into the story that would essentially be an item for Dash to seek out. But at the same time, I didn't want to provoke the shipping wars.
You were being an appeaser. Oh, you were being an appeaser, a compromiser.
More.
I just get it.
My own thought on this topic is that it doesn't exactly help the story any, but it doesn't hurt it either. I consider it more of a flavor thing, I suppose. Perhaps something for them to bond over.
I'm not really upset by it at all. The biggest problem I've always had with that whole orientation question, aside from the obvious problem of it doesn't necessarily belong in a children's show, the other problem that I've always had is that Rainbow Dash tends to be the one who is targeted when it comes to this whole situation.
Yeah.
And Lauren Faust herself went on record saying that just because Rainbow Dash has the rainbow colored mane and is the tomboy, she shouldn't automatically be considered the butch lesbian of the crew.
Again, everyone seems to keep skipping over the fact she flew off with 2 stallions at the end of the Sonic Rainboom, so yeah.
Sorry, boys, I've got plans.
I mean, in fairness, in fan fiction, it allows us to explore ideas and concepts that could not be explored in the original material. And if you explore it well, then there's no harm done. If you explore it badly, though, then there's harm done. In this, I think, well, the story wouldn't have suffered from its exclusion, but I don't think it's too harmed from it either. Granted, yeah, he's appeasing, but everyone does that from time to time.
It was really more of a smart move anyways, because I could just see that if he hadn't done this, that, or the other, I'm sure there would have been a million commenters, a million emails coming into his email address on fanfiction.net, or a million reviews saying, you jerk, how could you do this, that, and the other. My headcanon.
Well, I'm not so certain about that, but still, I know I could have probably handled that a little bit differently. At this point in time, I'm wondering if it's a little bit too late to go back and change something like that. Here's a question, Andrew. How would you have handled that?
I'd have thought about it if I was going to tie it into something later, or if I was going to use it as a gag. I guess it just seems like it was just in there, and I generally try to not throw something into a story if I can help it. That's just in there, because,
Well, I think I could actually bring up a good little mirror opportunity for you, in this case, Andrew, regarding something here. Progress.
Oh, boy.
And the relationship between Luna and her roommate and her roommate's boyfriend. There you go.
In fairness, I generally use that for gags.
Gag, sure, but you know what? How many of your readers have focused enormous, erroneous amounts of attention on those particular traits?
I guess it's sort of turning into my trademark. I guess there are worse things to be trademarked for.
It's like the male 6 for me.
In fairness, I don't do it just to titillate the audience. I guess I have a slightly weird humor, and given Luna's general awkwardness with the modern world, and the fact that her world romantic relationships could have been very different, I thought it might work to showcase just how out of time and place Luna is. And if it gets a couple of laughs and awkward fun, I'm content with that.
Yeah.
That sounds like it makes sense to me.
Admittedly, I do sometimes throw it in just for it, but since I built it up over the course of several stories, it doesn't appear just out of nowhere.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, here's another little thing that I had to think about for a moment. The ending of the story, and I'm going to use this to transition into another of my questions, but the ending of the story shows Princess Celestia actually has a method of communication with Prince Solaris, her male counterpart from the alternate universe. What made you decide to give that little bit of insight about Princess Celestia and Prince Solaris knowing each other?
Well, for one, I figured that would be a good way to end the fic. Two, it just seemed there was another one of those cases where it just seemed natural. Like, it seemed like Princess Celestia would be the type to have had something like that the whole time. She might have come and interfered in the events if she had known earlier, but at this whole time she was somewhat ignorant. And Solaris, Seeing that Solaris is essentially the same as Celestia, if you're wondering why didn't Solaris contact Celestia earlier, consider that he's essentially Celestia, and it's just...
I think I get what you're saying. You're kind of implying the whole fact that they've kind of got that sort of tricky little trickster sort of personality, where in that situation they would want to see how it played out between the main six and their male counterparts.
Yeah.
Coming off of that, during the conversation between Princess Celestia and Prince Solaris, she mentions Prince Solaris's brother, who you chose to name Artemis. And that brings up my next question. I heard tale, and I can't remember who I heard this from, that you were planning on going back and doing some mild rewriting, particularly regarding some of the alternate universe counterparts' names, and that Artemis was one of them, and Sweepy Belle was another one. Is that true, that you were thinking of changing those names?
Now, that is true. A little bit of time has gone past since I did that. What I did was I put up a poll on my FIM fiction profile.
Oh, democracy. Hey.
Yeah. The first poll had a couple of options for Artemis and a couple options for Sweepy Belle, as well as the options of either keep Sweepy or keep Artemis. That poll has more or less closed, and the overwhelming vote was more to keep Artemis as he was. So he will stay Artemis. Sweepy Belle, who is the male Sweetie Belle, a lot of the votes are calling for him to be changed to Silver Belle, which I'm going to give a little more time, and if Silver Belle is still the top of the charts, then I shall go ahead and go in and make those changes.
Interesting. Very interesting. There's a question that I have forgotten to ask, and I really do want to bring it up because without this, there is no story. In order to get them from one dimension to another, you needed a plot device. So why did you go with Twilight Screws Up a Spell?
I knew that would come up eventually.
He's on to us.
When I started, at that point in time, there were not that many fics being posted up on EQD with the plot of Twilight Screws Up a Spell. But it just so happened, at the time when I finally did get around to submitting the story, there were like 2 or 3 fics within 2 or 3 pages of each other that had the Twilight Screws Up a Spell bit, and mine was number 4? I don't remember. But yeah, if you're asking why I chose this, well, at the time I thought I was being unique.
I see. So it's one of those situations where you're disconnected from the fandom for a little while as you work on the story, and at the time you began, things were different. By the time it's finished, things are very different from how you started.
Yeah.
Thing is, a plot device is not inherently bad because everyone uses it for some purpose. I mean, what are the elements of harmony if not a plot device?
Well, yeah, tropes and cliches aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves.
Yeah, and it depends on how you use it. And in this case, it was just a means of getting our heroines into the situation where they needed to be. And that, as far as the plot devices and MacGuffins go, this was not a bad one. Did what it was supposed to do, and it stayed out of the way. It only interfered in preventing our heroines from escaping due to, plot. But it was constructed well. So just keep this in mind. It's not what you use, it's how you use it, as in anything else.
I can agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Though I will admit, aside from the theme, as it is, it's a good, decent story. There's just not much to it beyond the character interactions. Again, not necessarily a bad thing if you do it well, but it's not quite an epic. I don't think that was your intention, though, was it, Connor? And a big epic?
No, it really wasn't. I was just trying to write a story, and it just happened to turn into a 12-chapter monster that ran away from me.
I know that feeling.
I would hardly consider 12 chapters a monster when we've got stuff like Fallout Equestria.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah, now that's a monster.
Yes, it is.
We'll get to that eventually.
Oh, just you wait.
Oh, the things that I have planned for my review of Fallout Equestrian.
Oh dear, he's gone into the voice again.
I didn't see that.
Someone hit him.
Twack.
All right.
Good.
Well,
Okay, now he's fine.
the final chapter. I do have a question about the final chapter. Now, when you began the story, were you originally planning to write a sequel? As the final chapter gave us the hook of Applebuck, Applebloom's spear counterpart, winding up in the, we'll just call it Ponyville 1.
Yeah, primary universe.
Yeah, the primary universe. You know, Applebuck winds up in the primary universe looking for his cousin JJ. Were you originally planning to do a sequel when you started the story?
It was part of the initial plot that unraveled in my head. And yeah, I did kind of plan that from the start. And let's see. Writing the sequel right now, it's still in progress. And I know how I want things to go. It's just for some reason I'm not been real inspired to actually put a whole heck of a lot down.
Again, welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Such is the world of all authors, really. Everybody generally has these bursts of inspiration, and then they've got these dry spells that sometimes they last for a little while, sometimes they last the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me, of course, the sequel is called On a Whisper of Wind, but that brings me to the subject of titles. I have my own opinion, and I want to know if it is correct. Your title for the first story, On Across an Arrow. Did you call it On Across an Arrow because of the Mars-Venus dichotomy with the circle and cross for female and circle and arrow for male?
That would have been clever of him.
That was the original intention. Although, when I first posted up in the offer section on PonyChan, I had a lot of people asking me what the title meant.
Huh.
I'm glad that I guessed that, because I was totally thinking that I was overanalyzing, and that it was just like, oh, I totally thought you were going to respond with like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, but sure, whatever. But I'm actually really glad that I managed to guess that correctly, so woo!
As far as you know, I might have just given him an out to pretend that he's more clever than he seems, in which case he's actually very
Quiet
clever.
you. Let me have my victory.
Oh, all right. Just this once. The things I do.
Oh, well. So, we have On Across an Arrow, and the females winding up in the male universe. And we have On a Whisper of Wind, which is currently ongoing, where we have Applebuck has used other means to get to the female universe. And wouldn't you know it, in the very first chapter, he meets his own counterpart, even in the preview, I should say, at the end of On Across an Arrow. So it was actually like before even the prologue. But do you have anything that you might be able to share with us regarding the sequel as far as the direction you were kind of thinking it might take, and whether or not we're going to be seeing any precocious little child crushes with the Cutie Mark Crusaders?
Oh, I can already feel the diabetes coming on.
You might. You just might. We have a colt and 3 fillies, so you just might see something blossom.
Oh dear, Applebuck, young pimp in action.
Well, it doesn't help that the most recent chapter has Applebuck being forced at the end of the chapter into a situation he's not at all happy with. He has to seduce, who was it, Diamond Tiara or Silver Spoon? He has to seduce one of them, essentially, is the plan that the Cutie Mark Crusaders have come up for him.
That's correct.
Well, wait a few years and it probably won't be that difficult. I just thought their cutie marks meant that they were skilled at being spoiled rich brats. So, kind of the equestrian equivalent of Paris Hilton, really.
Oh God.
Yes.
That's horrible.
But now it's in your head.
Oh gosh, man. That's beyond horrible.
Welcome to my mind, the twisted Riley-like landscape from which you will never escape.
Yeah, well, I'm going to blame your fans for that whole thing, because I think that you had good intentions in the beginning. You've just been corrupted by this taint on everything internet.
Well, I can't really argue against that.
Well, okay, well, Andrew, you have any more questions for Connor?
I'm
Just
open.
one. How do you write? What is your method?
Well, let's see. How I do things is when I get ideas for stories, I have a document, a separate document, where I type down a synopsis of the story that's in my head. And this document is just full of different synopses and title ideas and such. And usually, whenever a mood strikes me, I'll go back to the document and choose one of the synopses and then proceed to flush the story that's behind it.
Well, it's a far sight better than me barely writing an outline and then just winging it for the rest of the time. Thank God I'm so good.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, Andrew, you do the exact thing that we were told not to do when I was in my good 4 years of creative writing class.
Well, nobody told me that because it wasn't creative writing.
Well, it's just one of those things where when somebody's trying to tailor you to write and actually finish a piece of work, they tell you, come up with the beginning, come up with the end, come up with the middle, and then find ways to connect those points.
I don't have a problem with beginning and end. It's the middle that I kind of meander around, but it's fun. Makes for a more interesting journey.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. All right, there was one other question that I had. Connor, would you like me and Andrew to give you our overall rating for your story and how we rate it on a Equestria Daily 1 to 5 scale? Since that's the generic fan fiction grading that people are familiar with, since a lot of the fan fiction that people know from the popular portions wind up on Equestria Daily. So that's the scale we use.
If you guys want to do that, I'm certainly open to listening. I certainly wouldn't mind hearing your opinions.
Okay, Bones, how about I go first?
You can go first.
All right. It stinks.
Oh.
Oh, no, I'm kidding. On a rating scale, I'd have to put it at a 3.5 to 4 star, based on the strong character interactions and very decent beginning, middle, and end. Yes, Bones, I'll make that shout out. Thematically, it doesn't have much beyond the characters, but that's not inherently a bad thing. But it is what keeps me from rating it a full 5 stars. Not a bad story by any stretch of the imagination. It had many memorable scenes and interactions, but overall, all I can say is you did good, but it's just not tipping my epic meter, and I have to be careful with that, because the last time I got loose with that, I blew it up.
Aww. Okay.
So, in short, good, and keep going, but try not to write the same story over again. Try to expand your horizons. You don't want to be like me, constantly rewriting the same concept of story over and over again and getting hundreds of fans and thousands, maybe even millions by this point. I haven't really kept track. I'm not sure where I was going with this, but point is, good work. I enjoyed it, and I believe most people will enjoy it too. But don't expect an epic. Just expect a basic, well-told tale. Something that we often see.
Thank you for that, Mr. Andrew.
Oh.
No problem.
Your grading and your points have actually reminded me of the other question that I wanted to ask Connor. So before I give you my little mini review of your story and the grade, I needed to ask you a question. Do you plan to go back and rework the story at all after the various different revelations we have gotten in Season 2 involving new characters like Discord and new characters like, most importantly, I think, in this regard, Shining Armor? Because now we know that Twilight has a brother in the real world, canon world, you know. She has a brother, there's these other characters that are really highly involved, and do you think there will be any references or even appearances by some of these new characters in the sequel, if not in On Across an Arrow itself?
Okay. Shining Armor's revelation, more or less, I'm going to admit, kind of wrecked Cross and Arrow. Now, Cross and Arrow will stay up, but aside from the name changing of Sweepy Belle, I do not really intend on going back and rehashing it to fit current season knowledge. What I'm planning on doing is adding a disclaimer in the story synopsis itself, claiming that it was written in the interim between seasons 1 and 2. As my idea for that, as the vein that I'm going to be finishing the other story in, Whisper of Wind, and I had an idea to do a further story, but I don't know if I really should.
Don't you want to at least share with us? Get our opinion, maybe, if you should go ahead with the plan?
Come on, just a little tidbit. All we're asking.
The synopsis for the third story that I had in mind was Celestia and Solaris make a bet. And what happens is Twilight and Dusk wind up changing places for a day.
Interesting.
God plays dice. Huh.
That wouldn't be the first time I have seen something similar, but with the obvious overtones of the mentor-student relationship possibly becoming something more when the genders become reversed.
Oh God, why would you even think that? Ugh.
Because it's made obvious. Connor himself will tell you he made it obvious in the first story.
It's still this. Yeah.
But, that's a very interesting idea. I think that's very interesting.
Admittedly,
Okay.
it might not be to my taste, but I'm open-minded enough to read it.
Your answer regarding the whole shining armor thing has left me with another question, so just one more quick thing, and then I will get to my rating for your story. Why did the revelation that Twilight has an older brother, why did that, in your opinion, ruin your story?
Well, if you recall back to the chapter where Dusk and Twilight actually meet, as a big part of the story in which both Twilight and Dusk do not know how to relate to each other. They are at a loss. And then they start talking about Spike and Spines and going about how they're the little brother / sister I've never had. And that particular angle is supposed to kindle the idea that they should relate to each other as siblings. Now, if Twilight already had a sibling, then there's really no...
Then it should have been like an easier pathway to them reaching a conclusion. Maybe I should just treat you like a sibling.
Yeah, it kind of takes the wind out of its sails.
Maybe a little. Admittedly, he did just kind of pop out of nowhere for the last episode of the season.
I'm going to actually disagree with you real quick, Connor, because I just went back and reread it. And knowing that Shining Armor is around, I actually looked, when I read this time, I looked for specific wording and how you worded the conversations and stuff like that. And while I'm not going to necessarily discount what you say because you are the author, I'm going to say that I personally think that it still works. Because you didn't actually use, in your writing, you didn't actually use any statements like, I've never had a sibling before. You just used Spike for the comparison rather than Shining Armor. And I think that kind of is more apt for the situation because they bring up Spines while they're in the library, and that's what kind of triggers the topic of conversation. But Dusk nor Twilight never actually say, I don't have a brother / sister, I don't have any siblings. You may not actually have to worry about that as much as you seem to think.
That is true. That is very true.
But all that being said, I'll go ahead and give you my little mini review. I would have to say that this story for me was very much character focused, and in that regard, it was very good. The conflicts were very much internal and also limited in scope. They never go beyond Ponyville. A lot of times actually just spent hiding out in the hedge. Aside from all of that, you really managed to portray those characters very well. You write them as if they were in the show, and you've really managed to take those aspects of them that make them great in the show and show them. When it comes to a couple of little different instances, I felt that some of the things might have come off a little bit forced, in my opinion.
Like the double rainbow?
The double rainbow wasn't actually that big of a deal to me because I honestly, I thought that was just there mostly just for the fact that it was almost like a reference, a meta reference, because I almost thought that you were doing it solely for the joke that you made later when Blitz is chasing after Dash and she performs the double rain boom, and then all of the ponies are freaking out about the double rain boom in town, and then the one goes, "What does it mean?" I thought it was like almost entirely for that reference. I was almost fine with that, especially since like classic Gen 1 pony had like tricks like the double inside out loop, which was like the double inside out loop. What is that? And then it turns out it's just a double loop de loop. But it's like, you know,
That was really impressive.
oh yeah, really impressive. It was impressive enough to make Tirak drop his Rainbow of Darkness.
Oh,
so.
he'd drop it if he got a flashlight in his eyes. I mean, the villains were mostly the most interesting part of the early series, honestly. A heavy dose of badass for the modern show.
I really think that they need to either bring out a reimagining of a classic villain like Tirak, or they need to create a new villain for the series. And actually, you brought up the Smooze. I liked it. I'm pretty certain it's in your story where Luna talks about the actual legend of the Smooze and what happened.
The movie and series versions are basically the storybook fairy tale versions, whereas in reality, in the distant past, the Smooze was basically an eldritch abomination brought forth by the witches to consume all of existence, and Crunch the Rock Dog was the god alpha, as he was called, of the Diamond Dogs, kind of a god king who tried to turn the whole world to stone, and he was summarily defeated.
Those are nice takes on classic villains that I think would be really cool. And actually, your take on the Smooze reminds me of the classic Western cartoon that was never finished, The Pirates of Darkwater.
Oh, I remember that. I love that show.
Yeah, but
I'm actually kind of...
when I refer...
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when I refer to stuff that kind of bothered me because it felt forced, I really mean the stuff that you did essentially to keep rabid fans from pounding down your door. The stuff like Rainbow Dash being bi-curious and finding the dirty magazine, the Cult Cuddler edition in Blitz's house, and the whole bringing up the fact that she has this weird sort of crush on Spitfire as she looks at the alternate universe picture of the Wonderbolts. Those felt unnecessary to me. And it's not necessarily that I disagree with that interpretation either of the character, but they didn't mean anything to me because
they didn't really add anything to the story.
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't suffer for them being there, but there's nothing really added. It's kind of like parsley on the side of a meal.
It's kind of like how that guy, you know, the pony who's dating Luna's roommate, or in Progress, him being a pony equivalent of a Jackass character. Totally pointless.
Well, on the other hand, it does come in handy and will come in handy when I finally rework the Ponies in Space arc.
The Ponies in Space arc. You know, Andrew, I'm just going to say, when it comes to your story, I stopped reading when it reached Ponies in Space because that kind of jumped the shark for me.
Yeah, I know, I got that a lot.
When I saw the Ponies in Space, I went, oh, holy crap, this is gonna be good.
Well, I mean, it's like, I like sci-fi, and I like mecha, but when Luna all of a sudden has turned an equestrian space program that she has made, and has made a mecha, and it turns out the mecha was actually originally like a plan she had when she was Nightmare Moon to usurp Celestia, that just kind of seemed to me to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, admittedly, I didn't really develop that properly. I probably really should, but...
I personally like the war hamsters.
Well, to be fair, it is something kind of adorable in a very evil sort of way.
Well, all of that kind of stuff included, I'm really looking forward to seeing you finish the sequel. And I would say that my rating would be a nice 4.5. The story is great. And when I really get invested in a story, when I'm reading it and I finish it all in one go because I don't want to stop reading it for any prolonged period of time, and when I'm laughing my butt off and clutching my sides, and there's only a couple instances that are groaners, or there's a couple instances that are just kind of like, that felt unnecessary, that's the sign of a good story to me. So I would say, while it's not perfect, it is really good. A lot better than a lot of the other stuff I see, usually, especially since now that we are trying to get Fanfic Review Corner to be more active and review more fan works, I have to start reviewing really bad fan fiction, and it's nice to see a good fanfic. So I say 4.5, just a solid 4.5. It's not perfect, but it's dang good. Any of you listening out there, if you haven't read it, go and read it, because it is a really good story.
Definitely go read it. Take my recommendation for what it's worth.
Well, thank you very much, you guys.
This is Andrew Joshua Talon. He's been on the internet for over a decade. Listen.
Well, I had something profound, but now nothing's coming to mind.
I have managed to ruin his brain.
Oh, I'm going to get you for this. Just you wait. I'm going to find a ponyfic so horrible, so terrible, you will claw out your eyes and scream for mercy.
You mean Spider Sis?
What?
Don't bring up that fanfic, Connor.
How
Don't
do
bring up
I
that
mean,
fanfic.
no, I wasn't going to... damn it.
We are never reviewing Spiderses, because Spiderses, cupcakes, they are not appropriate for anyone, let alone our podcast. And heck, even this one with its adult themes is going to be PG-13, rated at least, and typically we try to stay PG. So we'll have to put an appropriate label on this. Anyways, I think that just about does it for our interview here. This has been Brush and Bones here at Everfree Radio on our Fanfic Review Corner. We've been interviewing Connor Cogwork, so thank you all for joining us. I'm Brush and Bones.
I'm Andrew J. Talon.
And I'm Connor Cogwork. Thank you guys for inviting me on to here.
No problem.
Not a problem at all. We hope to see you again.
Okie doke.
This is Everfree Radio, signing off. Thank you, and have a nice night.